And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome aboard. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook on this Wednesday, September 4th, 2024. And this outlook will be for Thursday and Friday, but we always start out with the state of the sea ice. On this Wednesday afternoon, we have open water along the Arctic and northwest coast, the Chukchi Sea coastline and the Bering Strait. Still some ice lingering off of the Russian Arctic coastline, but we'll continue to see at least maybe a little more melt before we reach the minimum ice extent or melt off, which typically happens around the third week of September. And what we have coming up here, we have a low lifting out of the North Pacific into the Western Gulf this evening. That low is going to take a track up toward Lower Cook Inlet and weaken. The front ahead of it, though, has some gale force winds of it to the east. So areas along the northern, northeastern Gulf Coast and outer Panhandle will experience some gale force winds tonight and early Thursday. And there are some bands of moderate to locally heavier rain being enhanced by the terrain as we go through tonight into Thursday morning, especially from areas of Seward around Prince William Sound and then just east of Yakutat and up through especially northern central parts of the Panhandle. And what we'll watch, though, is there's another low and some energy back here over the southeast bearing back toward Kuskokwim Bay. And on Thursday, some of that energy is going to head east-southeastward, rotating along the broader mid-level trough. And that's what's going to help develop a secondary low near and just east of Kodiak Island Thursday afternoon and evening. And by the time we get into Friday afternoon, we'll have a weak low there just east of Kodiak Island in the western Gulf with a trough and some additional areas of rain or rain showers lingering along this. But I think the first system, the one that's coming through tonight and into Thursday morning, will be the stronger of the two. And then if we look farther west, there's going to be a stronger front working its way across the Bering Sea on Friday, and that front will be making landfall here through the Bering Strait and the west coast on Saturday. And with this front, there will be a band of light to moderate rain along with some gale force winds that could cause some higher water levels along the west coast this weekend, especially Saturday into early Sunday. So looking at the Panhandle for the marine forecast, we have southeast to south winds 20 knots, but there could be some gusts to 35-knot gales within Stevens Passage, Lynn Canal for the outer coast. South winds to southeasterly 20-25 knots, strongest especially out here in the northeastern Gulf, and seas building as high as 12 to even 18 feet there off of Cape Suckling. And then on Friday, we find winds southeasterly 20 knots within the inner channels with 35-knot southeasterly gusts within Lynn Canal. Waves generally running 3-4 foot chop there in through the inner channels for the outer coast. South-southeast winds right around 20-25 knots, swells generally 9 to 10 feet. And for the northwestern Gulf, gale warnings early tonight and then into the day Thursday. Strongest winds, southeast winds to 30 knots, Prince William Sound outside of Hinchinbrook entrance to Kayak Island. And we're looking at swells there 13-14 feet within the Gulf, within Prince William Sound, 6-7 foot. And then northeast winds to 25 knots along the length of Cook Inlet with swells of 5 to 6 feet. Those winds will come down on Friday. Generally easterly winds, Prince William Sound outside of Hinchinbrook entrance at 15 knots. 6-7 foot waves outside of Hinchinbrook with 3-foot waves within Prince William Sound. Variable winds to 10 knots off the eastern Kenai coast, just that weakening secondary low that's going to be kind of in place right here on Friday afternoon. And north winds to 15 knots and 4-foot waves, generally the rule there within Cook Inlet. Winds will be southwest to south, 15 to 20 knots around Kodiak Island on Thursday. As we trail out along the Alaska Peninsula, we'll see southwest winds picking back up more to 25 knots down toward Cold Bay Falls Pass, and waves either side of the peninsula running 6-7 feet as you get down there toward Sand Point, Cold Bay Falls Pass. And then for Friday, generally west to northwest winds 15 knots around Kodiak Island, Bristol Bay, Port Heiden, Chiknik. But as you get further southwest along the peninsula, we're looking at west-northwest winds 20 to 25 knots with the highest waves 5 to 9 feet there outside north of Cold Bay on the Bering side. The eastern Aleutians will see Westerly winds 30 knots, even upwards of 35 knots north there of Nikolsky on Thursday. And those winds fall off to westerly 20 to 25 knots west of Adak. On Friday, we find that the eastern Aleutians winds will be either west, northwest, eastern Aleutians at least 20-25 knots, turning southwesterly and then increasing to 30 knots west of Adak through Kiska and Shemya for Friday afternoon, and seas building back up around 10 feet there in the western Aleutians. That's all part of that stronger front that'll be working its way eastward across the Bering Sea, and the Aleutians are kind of more toward the south end of that system. Now for the southwest coast, first of all, St. Matthew to the Pribilovs, northwest winds 25 knots, 6 to 9 foot swells. Kind of a mixed bag of winds, Kuskokwim Bay, Bristol Bay, because of there's a couple of weaker low centers and energy that's working its way east-southeastward. Along the outer Yukon Delta, we're looking at northeast to north winds 10 to 15 knots and waves running 2 to 3 feet. For Friday, winds will come down, generally west-southwest 20 knots there from St. Paul up to St. Matthew. Look for northwest winds 15 to 20 knots, Kuskokwim, Bristol Bay, and then as high as 25-knot northwest winds off of Hooper Bay, but north winds generally 15 to 20 knots there in the wider expanse of Norton Sound and just west there of Amonuk. And then for the Bering Strait, north side of St. Lawrence, generally north winds 15 to 20 knots, 3 to 4 foot waves. East, northeast, northerly winds 10 to 15 knots, Chukchi Sea. And as you get up along the Arctic coast, look for easterly winds 10 to 15 knots, waves generally 2 to 3 feet. And then on Friday, those winds are going to flip along the Arctic coast. Look for westerly winds generally around 15 knots with 2 to 3 foot waves as we drop down through the Chukchi Sea, northwest to north winds 15 to 20 knots. And then as we get south of the Bering Strait along the west side of the Seward Peninsula, north side of St. Lawrence, winds will be out of the north at 20 knots with waves up near 5 feet.